Hey, it's MJ from the Coaches Panel. I hope you're well and welcome back to another of our AFL Fantasy Strategy Roundtables, where I get a number of members of the Coaches Panel. We put them all together and start to get their thoughts on how to help you with your AFL fantasy side. We are 2 rounds through, but 3 price movements in and at an interesting junction of the season. There's some great members of the Coaches Panel. I want to get the boys in on this episode with you, joining me as he has ever since we began the Coaches Panel. It's Rids. Hello, mate. How are you?
I don't know if I'd call myself great, though. You said there's some great members of the Coaches Panel.
Well, we'll take you as one of them. And then also on this episode, if he wants to dub himself as great, I'll do it for him. That's fine. MiniMonk, good to see you, mate. How are you? And a big week of AFL fantasy coming up for us.
Big week indeed. Big week. Lots going on. Only 8 games, so there's a bit of relevance with that. And we'll try and unpack that during this episode.
Another week of best 18 with a couple of teams missing for us, and arguably this is going to be the most relevant of the buys to date. And we'll talk about that in a moment. But right out of the gate, I want to talk about this interesting position that we find ourselves in our trade and upgrade cadence. We're in this weird spot, Rids and MiniMonk, where some teams are in 100% correctional mode. There's still, whether it be an injuries that has come their way, such as a Nick Caulfield, for example, some mid prices that are still burning them and still playing catch up on some cash cows. They are in complete correction mode. Then you've got some that are in an interesting position that are kind of not loving what they've got, but really only need the one trade to make the move. And then they're just forward thinking. They're thinking about cash generation. They're thinking about maximizations of trade in the next couple of weeks. Players like Riley Bonner sit in that spot where they go, oh, if I got stuck with him for a week, it's not a disaster. If I had to field House again for another week, it's not a disaster. And then you've got other teams that from a cash generation perspective have solid. From a premiums, no concerns, and mid prices for the most are in really good spots. And they're arguably in luxury and maybe even half thinking about some upgrade maneuvers they could consider. So MiniMonk, maybe we'll start with you on this. It is an interesting position for coaches. While there's a lot of similarities in a large portion of the community, this is an interesting week where I think we'll start to see some differentiation take place, not just with who's on field, but the way we approach this round.
I think we're seeing it a lot in terms of the way that coaches are trying to structure up their teams. They're making a lot of structural shifts as opposed to just shifting mid-price and then mid-price in the same line. We're seeing a lot of love for the 4 rookies on field in the midfield and the likes of Sharp, McKercher, Roberts, and Sanders, who have all shown that they have very high scoring, and that's providing a lot of safety when it comes to these best 18, that you can rely on them to provide a score that's almost in your 18 if you need it to be. And then you're seeing a lot of other teams that are doing rookie shuffles to try and get onto the ones with the lower break-evens that they missed, such as a Dempsey or a Sharp. Maybe this week it's someone like a Gallagher. And then there are also people doing the ruck shuffles as well. You know, people that missed on Cherry, people that weren't happy with Grundy to start off the season and wanted to go to Gawn. It's a lot of diversity in terms of the way that teams are structuring up. And that's making it a very interesting landscape this week for fantasy, because there's a couple of players that have been very popular for coaches to be targeting this week. But by the numbers at the moment, it looks like Massimo D'Amborsio and Tom Powell are by far and away the 2 most popular trade-ins. And then we've got some people that are going for some upgrade targets for premiums that they might have missed. So this is a Matt Crouch, who's come in at a very cheap price point, who's had a fairly good start to the season. There's a Caleb Sarong, who's probably the top premium behind maybe Tom Green to start the season so far. And then it's an Isaac Heaney and an Isaiah Wanganeen-Miller. So you're talking about a forward and defender who are very high scoring and very, I guess, lowly priced compared to what their output has been to start the season. So it's interesting to see the structural shift in terms of where people are going. You know, there's a lot of the crowd that are going towards that mid-pricer option, which we've seen be successful in the past. And they're probably hopeful that these players can emulate players like a Will Day or a, defender from North Melbourne from last year. Will Setterfield. Those types of players.
Aaron Hall, Jack Zeeble.
Aaron Hall, Zach Zeeble. Yeah, all of those types of players. And it's very interesting that there's such a focus towards that, because that's not something that's been pretty normal in the community. It's not being that these players are the most traded in. Normally it's a mid-pricer and a rookie, or a premium and a rookie, and most people are making their splits that way. But I think that really changes the landscape, and it comes back to, as you said, how teams are structured up for round one. You know, have they made a lot of mistakes? Have they got a lot of things right in the team? And what can you do with that from there?
Rids, what's your take on this unique position? Because what we can do is almost find ourselves in an awkward spot with what to do if there's nothing bleedingly obvious. And then sometimes we can think, oh, I've got to be patient, and that's the mistake. And other times we can push too hard, and that's the mistake. What's your read on, I know it's team dependent is the answer, but what's your read on how we should handle a week like this?
Well, I love it. This adds diversity to it, okay? You know what this has done, this start of the year? Guns and Rooks is back, MJ. Like, you think about the rookies right now popping scores. We had a Dempsey with a 90. We've had those midfield rookies across the boards going 70s, 80s, 90s, you know? This really, really presents for a Guns and Rook approach, especially with the best 18 4 out of the first 6 weeks. Like, this is absolutely, you know, if you landed a guy like Sarong in round one, that's actually makes massive, massive differences with that monster score that he had. You know, it just means that everything's in play. If you had started a Tom Green, we would have frowned upon that as a community, a premium with an early buy, you know. But the fact of the matter is, he's buyed this week. We've got 4 midfield rookies, all capable to replace him to this week, with great draws and great scoring potential for what they're priced at. Like, it may actually be different. This is good. This means we may actually have that age-old question, value versus Guns and Rooks, and this is really up in the air this year, yeah? Everything can go. We've got a clean canvas and a new way to play the game because of opening round, double price rises, early buys, and so on and so forth. There's just a new way to do this.
Yeah, there is. And I think that's the beauty of the game too, is that ultimately each year, while there are certain trade cadences and ways of approaching AFL fantasy that have led to success, at the end of the day, each new year does provide new ways of playing the game, new opportunities. But to your points, Rids, there's a lot of new variables and dynamics that have landed in this year that we haven't had before.
And you think about it, just from last year, okay, we had 5 monster premium forwards going at 110. This year, what do we got? We got Heaney, we got maybe Jackson, maybe Flanders. A bit of Flanders, who's on a buy. And then we've got to make it up, yeah? Whether it's everyone's jumping on Jordan, everyone's jumping on Sexton, everyone's jumping on these mid-prices. We're just making this up as we go, really. Like, and we're hoping for the best. But what that means is no one's right, no one's wrong. There's a whole heap of world out there, and there's many ways to skin the cat. You know, we've been saying that for years, yeah, MJ, for 10 years now. It's never been more truer than 2024. Put it that way.
It's very, very true. So we're in this interesting spot of the year, MiniMonk, not just from a trade cadence, correction, chasing value, best 18 perspective, but in this interesting spot with people's fixtures and the teams that they're coming up against as well. We've had teams that have got unbelievably good matchups over the past couple of weeks. GWS, for example. And one of the reasons people popular leaning into a Tom Green, for example, was the fixture was so good and they've been rewarded without any doubt now. Starting Tom Green, is it the right move? I would say this. It's been not a bad move for you to make that trade. We'll get to see over time what ultimately is the right and wrong approach. Now we're in this interesting spot. We'll get to the buys in a moment, but how do we look at teams' fixtures at the moment? Because it's interesting where we often start our squads thinking about fixtures. We get to the upgrades thinking about the fixtures, but we probably don't think about fixtures all that much over sort of rounds 3, 4, and 5. So from your perspective, how do the matchups that we're seeing week to week impact the variables of what you're either doing from a on-field, trades, and potentially even some upgrades?
I mean, it really dictates who you're trading out and who you're trading into as well. Like, if you're trading into a mid-pricer, chances are they probably already got a low break-even, but you need them to maintain that low break-even. So we look at someone like Riley Bonner last week, who had a low break-even after a ton the previous round in round 1. He only drops to 60. His break-even then spikes to, I think it's 34 or 35 this week. There's not as much cash generation there now purely because of the one game. Now, wasn't exactly a tough matchup. It wasn't an easy matchup, but some things probably didn't go his way as much as he would have liked. But if you're trying to trade into a mid-pricer like that at a similar price tag, you want to try and have a look at the fixture they've got coming up. Do they have good matchups for the next 3 or 4 weeks? Because if you can capitalize on that, say they string 4 85s together instead of 4 80s, that could be 20, 30Ks worth of difference by the time you get to that end of that 4-week block, which could be the difference between getting to the premium you want and having to settle for one that you're not quite as happy with. And then the other thing you got to look at it with is, you know, when you're playing your rookies, which rookies have good matchups, which rookies don't have good matchup. I think we like all 4 of the mid rookies at this stage, but you've still got to be aware of what role they're playing in their team and what their team's matchup is on any given week. We know that Sharp's playing on an outside wing. We know that Sanders is playing a bit of rotation between inside mid and half forward flank. We know that Roberts is playing off of half back, and we know that McCoach is playing off of half back. So if you can start to identify what the roles are of players, not just what their role is and position is in AFL Fantasy, but what their actual position is on the field, can go a long way to making the right decisions, not only in who you bring in, but who you put onto field and even how you structure up your team. You know, if it's a good week to have someone like Roberts, Sanders, and McCoach on field, but not Sharp, and you only need the 3 mid rookies on field, maybe you want to bring in a midfielder that week, or you want to DPP one of your defenders or forwards into your midfield for that particular week. And those are the things I think that really can make the difference at the moment, because in best 18 at the moment, there's not a huge amount of point variation in terms of the really good teams, the good teams, and the bad teams. It's being hidden away. The floor scores kind of get wiped off. But if you can just nail those small things, that might be 5, 10, 15 points if you nail rookie roulette. And that can go a long way between now and by the time we get to the end of the second round, second set of buys as well, because there's a lot of best 18 rounds between now and then.
Yeah, and I want to get your thoughts on that.
One of the things I want to talk about is Riley Bonner, okay? You think about last week. We went into last week not even thinking he was not going to be in our best 18 scores for the week. And what happened was he had a bit of a shocker, radio, and he dropped out of our scores. So his cash gen's now sort of dried up a bit. His score wasn't there to capitalize in the best 18. That's the risk we're having with these mid prices. And I know this week we've got Tom Powell, and, you know, I won't try and say his name because I'll get it wrong. And Liam's already called it out, okay, that I'm going to get it wrong. So I'm not going to do it. I'm just going to go Mass, okay? We've got Mass and Powell as 2 of the big mid prices this week that everyone's jumping on. But guess what? There's no reason why we're not sitting here next week, at this time next week, discussing them like we are Bonner right now, because that's the 100%. Risk we take. Okay?
100%. Bonner the role was there, and the role is there for Powell. The role is there for Mass. Who would have thought? Maybe it's there. Come on, Rids, jump back on.
Yeah, but you think about it, though. If they're already going to be, if there's not that much points differential between the 18 to 19 to 20 scores, you know, from 17th to 20, and they fall in that bracket of your best 18 per week, then maybe it's better to go up to the top end and try and maximize that fixture for the captaincy or the vice captaincy loopholes. So there's many ways we can do this, yeah?
Again, that's the beauty of this season, isn't it, MiniMonk? We're finding different options and avenues and unique ways to play the game. We'll see how it all plays out in the next 8 to 10 weeks, but it's fascinating what happens this week.
Well, I think Rids is 100% correct. If you're trading into someone like a Tom Powell or a Massimo, you really do need those probably 90s type scores to say that you're getting 30-ish points on your rookie scores that might be falling off your best 18. Because if we look at it, I'd say most teams are looking at about the 5 to 6 rookies on field at the moment, depending on how they've structured up with early buy premiums, depending on how they've structured up in terms of a guns and rookie type approach. If you're saying that they are taking you from 6 rookies to 5 rookies, if you go the both of them, and that means that let's say your rookies are scoring 65 and they're going at 90, that's 25 points. You can probably get that another 25 going to a premium and a rookie as well. You know, you go to a Bontempelli, you go to a Dunkley, you go to a Sarong, you'd be hoping that they're going 110, maybe 115 in that particular round. You know, it can even out in that sort of manner. And so I think Rids is 100% correct saying that if you are trading into these players, you want to be pretty confident that they are able to significantly outscore the rookies that you are bringing in instead. And that last week, that didn't seem to be the case, because the 2 most popular mid prices to trade into last week both ended up just inside, or a lot of them just outside of our best 18 scores. And I'm talking about Jack Billings and Riley Bonner.
Yep.
And MJ, you know what we do find? The cash generations, okay? They're at a lower price point. They're the ones that are guaranteed to hit their break evens, their price points, outscore it, because they are priced at the 30s and 40 range, okay? So when a Dempsey goes out and pops a 93 or something like that, or a Thomas last week, for instance, that goes out and goes 100, they're not going over that 30-point barrier. They're actually going 50 points, 60 points better. Yes. These mid prices, it's very hard for them to go 50, 60 points over. So that's the other part to put that. So if they're not scoring the points like Bonner last week, and they're not getting the cash generation, the safest option is to go a little bit lower, grab that rookie that's pretty much assured that price generation to a point for walking out on the park, yeah?
100%. You get a 50 from a Dempsey last week, for example. He's still a moneymaker for the next 2 to 3 weeks for us, but you get a Bonner's 60. Okay, you pop that 30K, but now you're needing him to return back to that 100 to really reinvigorate that cash generation. Otherwise, you're starting to only get $15,000 and $20,000, and that's far from what you want to be able to get out of a player like that.
And the guy I want to discuss right now, though, is Brodie Grundy. His scores are fine. He went 118 in round 0. He then popped a 90 last week. He had that 50 in the round 1, okay?
Yep.
The problem that we got with that 50 is we were all selecting him for as a cash earner because his price point was so much lower than what we expected. Right now, he's not generating the cash we thought he would generate. His points is fine, and we can pretty much live with him. He's going to average 90, 95 for the year, but we want quick cash generation so we can get to those next level, whether it's a English, whether it's a Marshall, whoever it is. It doesn't matter who it is, but that's what we want. We want to build that cash for that guy so we can turn him into someone else. But if he pops the 50 this week, he's done, mate. You know what I'm saying?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, for sure. But I think we've also, I was talking about the matchups before. We've got to look at the context on the matchups that Brodie Grundy has had, because his matchup against Melbourne was probably what you'd call a relatively neutral matchup. Max isn't a particularly restrictive matchup, but he's not a particularly easy matchup either. But then he comes up against Collingwood and then against Essendon, both running dual ruck setups, and both have been seriously restrictive this year. Collingwood have restricted every single ruckman they've come against. They restricted Briggs in round 0, Grundy in round 1, and now they've restricted Marshall in round 2 as well. So there's a bit of context there that, yes, he's not generating cash, but he is coming into some good matchups. And the other point I was going to make is with a lot of these mid prices, you want to be looking at how many tickets you've got, how many players in that price bracket do you actually have at the moment that are either performing or not performing, because up forward, there's probably quite a lot of people that are on a lot of these mid prices. We talk the likes of Sexton, Jordan, Fife, McDonald, McKenzie, Fisher. Like there's Billings. There's you take your pick. It's choose whoever you want. And a lot of them are just fluctuating. They're slowly making cash. They're not going massive. They're not going terribly either, but they're still moving upwards in price. But a lot of people don't have them in their midfield. they're running a pretty guns and rookie type approach. Maybe there's some people with a Martin, a Crouch, an Amon, a Newcomb, who a couple of them have failed, a couple of them have been successful. And then down back, it's mainly just a Zach Williams who people are approaching. So if you're pretty happy with the fact that all of your mid prices that you currently have are in a good spot, or that you can correct them and go to the ones that are on the way up, then maybe that's an option as well. Because it's like, if you've got 6 mid prices and 5 of them are successful and one's failing, that means you've only got one issue to fix the next week. And that's not so hard. But if you've got 6 and 4 are failing and you're creating into another one, that's a bigger concern.
Yeah, it absolutely is. I want to talk about MJ, premiums and the buys. Yes, Rids is going to do his
thing. Before you go on, I'm just going to interrupt again, Rodeo. I just want to highlight Brodie Grundy because I reckon he's a really interesting discussion right now, okay? So he's got Richmond and then he's got West Coast the next 2. So if he goes 105 and 105 in the next 2 weeks, okay, he generates just over 50,000 for the next 2 weeks. And he's averaging that worthwhile average of 95. But what do we do at his buy? That's the interesting thing. Do we move off him because we got no one to replace him with at that point in time? Do we hold him for a couple of extra price rises, you know, because he's going to be priced around that 770 mark, which is neither here or neither there in regards to getting those big dogs. It becomes that really, it's an intriguing conversation, Brodie Grundy. And I think what we've done as a community is we're going, hey, he's scoring okay. Yeah, he is. But that 53 in round 1 has really hampered the sweet spot of what we wanted was that quick cash generation. And yes, he's definitely going to outscore his price point in the next 2 weeks.
Of course.
But that buy and the timing of that buy becomes a real interesting discussion.
Yeah, it absolutely does. Speaking of buys and premium players, it's a really interesting week this week. It's not the first time we've done best 18. In about 5-10 minutes time, I want to get your thoughts, Rids, about the best 18 and what it looks like for us over these next few months. But teams that have started well from a rankings perspective generally have a combination of multiple of these players. Whitfield, Green, Flanders, Miller, let alone the lower range guys, they are all missing this week. You could throw a Sexton into the mix of that if you like, but I think the vast majority of the community have started him based on ownership percentage. That's going to change after this week, I'm sure. But the premiums that have performed well for us and captaincy scoring like a Tom Green, where he's been dynamite pick, this is the big week, because last week, politely, Carlton and Brisbane, as good as they've got a couple of options for us, there was no premiums that the vast portion of the community are on, no mid-prices that the vast community was on outside of Zach Williams. So, MiniMonk, this is the first week of the 3 of the next 4 where we are going to find out team structures. And as good as the cash cows are, and Rids, I know, has brought up a great point about options covering, we are going to find out people that have been swimming out in the ocean, how deep they've been swimming with any premiums that are on buys, and those that are about to get caught out with going uber heavy on some buy structural moves. What's your view of how this next 3 of 4 weeks could go and how the premiums have ultimately impacted our teams that have now got an early buy?
I want to actually clarify. I don't think it's 3 out of the next 4. I just think it's just the next 2 out of the next 3. I don't think that there's so many teams that are running too many options of Melbourne and Richmond. The only players that I'm seeing as being quite popular from those teams are, you know, Max Gawn, Jack Billings, a little bit of Jaden Shaw, and a bit of Seth Campbell as a rookie. And
outside of Max, none else.
And yeah, exactly. There's no out and out premiums on that buy. But we look at this week and round 5, and we've got Collingwood and Sydney, and with Collingwood, it's basically just Daicos, which is another conversation to have.
It's Daicos, Goulden, Heaney. Yeah,
there's a lot there. Grundy, Jordan, you know, it's even affecting some of the depth that we have on our lines, Roberts, and so I think these I guess, the 2 out of the next 3 weeks, these 2 next best 18 rounds are the ones where coaches that have gone heavy on early buy premiums are going to feel it the most. So if you don't have many of them, maybe this is an opportunity for you to gain some rank. If you do have a lot of them, don't be shocked if your rank slides a bit, but just try and hang on and try and do the right thing for your team. Don't go trading out someone who might be a season-long keeper just because you want the sugar hit for that particular week. We advise against that during the mid-season buys. I'm probably going to advise fairly similarly at the moment. I don't think that's necessarily the case for all of the premiums, but it's a good place to start at. But we look at this one in particular here. We're looking at, Gold Coast and GWS. Chances are we've got people that have got Tom Green. Well, good news is, as Rid said, you can cover him with one of these good mid-rookies, depending on how your structure is.
Correct.
You've got Lockie Whitfield. Maybe you can look to cover him with a Blake Howes, who has been pretty good.
Williams.
Matchup isn't...
Yeah.
Howes is, the matchup isn't quite as good this week. It's not dreadful. Up forward is a bit tricky. If you've got Flanders, you can probably try and cover him with a Reed or a Wilson or a Dempsey. Maybe there's someone that pops at 75. But the good news is you have the ability to be able to loop. You have the ability to be able to have a look at a couple of scores if you play your cards right. And that helps a lot. But it depends. I think the important thing to realize is how much is too much. Like, how thin are you stretching yourself? I know Jaden's done some great work looking at the top 10,000, the top 1,000. Over half the teams in the top 10,000 have 4 or more players on the buy this week before trades. That's a lot. That is a lot of your team. That's a lot of your team that you might have already got the cash generation of. And you might be like, I want to flip them this week. There might be someone like a Cadman. You might be like, I'm done with him. There might be someone like a Whitfield who's made 60K in 3 weeks or 3. Yeah, Sexton as well. But there's a lot of scope for how you approach this if you are stacked on that buy, and there's a lot of scope for how you approach your trades this week if you're light on that buy and you have the ability to make some moves outside of trading GWS and Gold Coast players.
Yeah, Reds, jump in.
So I want to highlight a key point right now. You have to focus on round 12 as well and round 15 and the mid-season buys. Because if you're trading a Whitfield this week and you're trading him to a Dunkley or a Sheasel, okay, for instance, guess what? They're on the round 12 buy as well. They're not going to help you better your mid-season buys by doing that. So try and focus on the big picture as well as to it. Otherwise, why trade out for Whitfield? He's going at 100 and something already. You might as well just hold on to him. You're not bettering your team, yeah? So I just want to highlight that. The next thing I want to highlight is between now and round 16, we got 7 rounds of best 18. That's a huge number, MJ.
That is a game changer.
So someone like a Tom Green, for instance, right now, he's missing 2 out of the next 10 rounds. Okay, he's missing 2 games out of the next 10. Yeah. So it's not the end of the world if you park on him, if you don't own him, or if you have him, obviously you're going to be holding him for now. But if you don't own him, you don't need to jump on him in round 6 when he's, or round 5 or round 4 when he's coming off the bye, because it's okay to actually park. Just make sure the other option you're going to go is going to likely match him points to price, if that makes sense, okay? So that's the sort of strategies you can have, because some of these teams with Tom Green right now, you're not going to get those points if you're trading into him this week. You're only going to get the points from when you trade him in onwards, not what he's already done. And I traded into Sarong last week, not with the expectation I was going to get 160 points for round 1, but because I think he's going to be great for the year, and he's got a huge buy in the middle of the year. That's the sort of trades. You just want to try and keep your trade agility, and I know I've used it for the first time this year, but trade agility as best as you can, be flexible, but make sure you can pivot when you want to. And we know how important the pivot is in these sort of games in AFL fantasy terms.
100%.
So when you're looking at these types of players, I'll use Green and Whitfield because they're on the same team. They've both done a very similar thing where they've gone above what their starting price was and what they were priced at. And they both look like they could be in the top 8 and top 6 of their line respectively for the entire season. if you're considering trading them out, you got to consider, as Rid says, what buys they have. So they have the buy this week and they have the buy in round 12. You've also got to consider what their fixtures are between now and then as well, especially the fixtures immediately after the buy. So we look at what the GWS fixtures are in the next 2 weeks after this. Even though in the next 3 weeks after this, it's Gold Coast, St Kilda, and Carlton. And based off of the DFS matchups, based off of how it looks at this stage of the year, they're really, really good matchups for Whitfield. Like, they're probably 3 out of the 5 easiest defensive teams in order to score against. Great news for him. But it's not good news for someone like Tom Green, because Gold Coast and St Kilda are currently a couple of the most restrictive midfields. So if you're looking at that, the numbers would say, oh, you trade out Green instead of Whitfield. It's never that simple, unfortunately. But this is the type of things that you can use as kind of a way to look at it. Another one that I've been looking at, especially for that, is someone that we've just talked about previously, Brodie Grundy. You know, he has the great run into his bye. He's got he's got Richmond this week. He's got West Coast next week. A couple of relatively soft matchups. And then he's got his bye. And people might say, oh, they might see the break even go down to 50, 60 and go, oh, he's restarted his cash generation. It might be time to hold on to. Straight after the bye, he comes up against Gold Coast, then Hawthorn, then GWS, then Fremantle with Sean Darcy back by then Carlton. It's very restrictive matchups. So if you're not forecasting, if you're not eyes forward and looking at how you're getting off Brodie Grundy at round 5, because that is probably the ideal point to jump off of him now, unless you've got him in R3 like some coaches do have, that's when you can jump off. And then you want to look to who you're jumping to. And I think that that's another conversation that we're going to have a little bit later on in this episode.
Yeah, there's definitely a few interesting guys through there. I want to come back, Rids. There are some trade forecasts we want to get to, and there's half a dozen to a dozen players I want to get specifically your boys' thoughts around. But Rids, you alluded to it a little bit, but I think there's a little bit more under the hood I want to draw out of this best 18. We've had 1 week. So often we're used to 3 or 4 weeks across a season, and it's all condensed to the middle part of the year. Now we're getting 2 blocks of 4. Really, let's call it what is. A third of the season is best 18, which is huge for us. Rids, I'm keen on your thoughts around this, because we know some bad scores drop off. I think those that had Caulfield on field are thankful for that. Those that had Daicos are probably pretty thankful that he should hopefully have dropped out, let alone the 40s and 50s you might have got from a Sexton, a Buderick, or whatever it actually was that was through there. Do you think there's some foundational challenges that as a community we might have either missed the signs or not realized the level of impact that so many best 18 weeks over the first 16 weeks of the year might actually have to not just our cash generation, but ultimately our points on field?
So what I found in AF, over the last couple of years is we tend to do groupthink a lot, and everyone's working off the same playbook for AF. So this is the fix-it trade period. Then we go into, we're focused about building that team build, that dollars value. We've got things like luxury trade season, upgrade season. You think about all of the terms we've made up and we've just inherited, and that's the playbook I'm talking about. I worry though, MJ, sometimes we do lose sight of it and we fall back in those playbooks as our default, but sometimes the variables change within the game itself, whether it's best 18, multiple buys, double price rises in the first week, whatever it is, whatever variable we have, but we don't adjust to it. We go, oh, no, this is what's done well for us last year, so we're going to go and do it again. The fact of the matter is we don't have 5 premium forwards going at 110 from round 1 for the whole year. We don't have those rucks. We've got value rucks this year. We had a lot of surplus of cash when we were choosing our starting teams. We had a lot of cash, Not many teams would have gone, you know what, I'm struggling to find a way to spend my cash in that pre-season, determining what the starting. To even the point, we were looking at 3 rucks And one of them priced nearly 600,000 to start on the bench to generate cash for us. And like, I mean, that's how much cash we had left over, yeah? And how many value options there were across the board. So I just worry at times. What we do is we fall back to the default of the playbook. And yes, it's been successful for a lot of coaches, yeah?
Sure.
There's no doubt about it. Selby pretty much highlighted the value aspect, and then we've got guys like JD, Lemon, and everyone else who have then grabbed it. Even MiniMonk, okay, who's been back-to-back top hundreds, okay, has built it based off this playbook that we're going to have. And sometimes we try and pick and choose our moments when to go away from groupthink. But I'm just cautious right now with those best 18s for that large chunk. Are we going to have enough cash to catch up those points when it's coming up to round 16? We might hit round 16 if we sit there on our hands, sitting on our hands and go, oh no, the dust is going to settle. It's going to come back. And guess what? At round 16, we go, oh, bugger. We got no chance, yeah. And that team was a lot better than what I actually anticipated it was. That's the questions we need to be asking now, because there is a distinct possibility that that could come to fruition right now.
Absolutely. MiniMonk, Ritz has mentioned you've gone back-to-back hat-winning top 100 seasons. I think between you and me, we're in a triple stretch of hats at the moment. So maybe we can pass that on to somebody else. We'll see how we go, unless you'd like to get the trio yourself. I'm pretty sure you're keen on that. How much of what Ritz has just said there is sounding a jungle alarm that we've really got to pay attention to? Is it a little bit of hyperbole, or is it complete miss of the mark? What's your take as you hear that as someone that has had success in AFL fantasy? What do you read into that?
Oh, I think with all things in life, the truth lies somewhere in the middle. I think that he's definitely sounding alarms that I've thought about myself and thought about that best 18 might change it slightly. But I think that he's right in that by round 16, we might have been, we got it wrong. And I think that that's 100% correct. But I think that it's really hard to know that at this stage of the season, because I always find that the cash generation that you generate and that differentiates you from the rest of the other teams that are playing the game, that really affects you in that period of time between when you're making your first upgrade and when you actually enter the first set of buys. So between about round 6 and 7 and round 12. And if we look at that stretch, only one game in that stretch is actually best 18, round 6. And even then, it's the first one, it's the first upgrade. Typically during that round 6 or round 12 stretch is when you can make about 50 to 100 points on other teams by being that half upgrade to a whole upgrade ahead, by having that good cash generation. So if you think that you can stay within 200, 300, 400 points of the top 100, top 1,000 between now and then, I think you can probably hold on. But I think it's going to be very hard to, because a lot of the players that have had that early buys have had that advanced cash generation, have had the ability to be able to put those teams at a pretty similar team value to you as well. And they now have the option as to whether they want to flip off of those players or whether they want to sit tight and think that those players can ride them through until the end of the season, or at least until the buys. And so I think that they can leverage their position there as much as other coaches who have taken a more value approach and are trying to build their team value can try and leverage their position as well.
So MJ, I'm just looking at the magic number right now, okay? So we started at 9,018. Now I know we were probably closer to 9,030 because these aren't exact numbers, okay?
It's ballpark, I understand. Yep.
But we then jumped down to 8,739, which was about a 4% drop. It then rose again last week by 165 points. So the way that we do this, okay, and there's plenty of sites out there that work out how the magic number is and everything else, okay, and display it. Work out how much your team value is. How many points are you behind the top 100 if that's your goal with a hat or anything like that? Just monitor it right now. Don't go changing your approach. If you're going one way, back it in. Not telling you to jump at shadows and to run around because the world's going to blow up or anything like that. Just monitor it, because you'll be able to work out how many points are you away from the top 100. Times that by your magic number. That's how much roughly you want to try and have a bit more dollars around it, okay? Because you will come home at some point through the year. It just may not be post mid-season buys this year, okay?
Sure. No, I think that's
just
fair.
with that, I was just going to say two things. It's that team value that you have, that is week on week as well, that you can generate those points. It might only be 100K, which might only be 10 points, but that can scrape you back 10 points week on week, potentially. And I think it's really interesting that the magic number actually went back up last week. And I think that was because there weren't really that many ceiling scores as well. Like the highest score last week was only a 131. There were only 8 players that went 120 or more, which feels very low, even for a week where there's only been 8 games played.
8 matches.
So yeah, it feels very strange that that's happened. And that might affect the way that price fluctuations happen in the following weeks as well, because normally you see that magic number really start to dip down over those first few weeks. And the most amount of cash generation you can get as a result of that is around about that round 6, round 7 time point. And that's when you start to get your massive gains in your team value. But that's one to monitor if that continues for the season.
And MJ, I'll just highlight because you know that I've been doing a bit of research in the background with magic numbers and everything else. I've actually got the 2023 fluctuations right now. It actually went up last year on the same round as this year. It actually went from 8,658 last year in round 1 to 8,678. So it was only a jump of 20 points, not that 140, but it did actually go up last year. So whilst we could see that it is actually a little bit more diverse and a little bit more deep with some of these jumps and everything else, but we're only talking about 0.5 to 1% of the fluctuations round to round compared to last year. But that actually did go up last year at the same point.
Yeah, fair enough. Before we wrap up the episode, there's about 8 players or so. Honestly, I could ask you about 30. And there are a lot of different guys. Like people want to know about Nazaya Wanganeen-Miller, how real this is and can we do it? Is now the time to jump off an Alex Sexton, or do we wait the week and use him as a loophole and get the captain score? I think those are where MiniMonk's answer is team dependent. Probably kind of sits in a little bit through there, but I've kind of picked 8 players that I'm keen on your boys' reflections. A couple of premiums that are coming back to earth financially with an absolute rocket. And owners and non-owners, I think we've got to talk about. There's one there that is a highly owned player that I think everybody that owns him has at least thought about trading him. There's a couple of mid-price guys that are really moving fast into selection. We've already alluded to the Powell-miss, so we will get to them. And then there's a couple of cows, and you've already alluded to a ruck opportunity that could sit there for us. There's one of them that are there. So there's a few names that we've alluded to. We've got to talk about Nick Daicos. Safe to say now, while we could say, hand on heart, fading Nick Daicos was always the right approach. Every person that was fading him, it was just being nervous up until about halftime Thursday night last week. And ever since then, they've kind of breathed a little bit more easily about it. There's still a chance he's got a break even of 143. That's well within his wheelhouse. But with a Finn McGuinness tag almost certainly coming his way, that's been telegraphed a long way out from Sam Mitchell, and potentially 2 sub scores pre-buy. Safe to say, non-owners are feeling really settled, and owners, this was one of the risks for you. It was going to not work for someone. Unfortunately for owners, it looks that way. MiniMonk, it might be a luxury trade. In fact, it definitely is a luxury trade. But let's talk to I think it's 40-odd% of coaches that own Nick Daicos. They see the big break even. They've got a bad score. They can forecast one coming on round 4 and gather round. What do you say, and what's your advice to Nick Daicos owners? And then, Rids, I'll get your take for what it means for a non-owner.
I think it's really tricky if you're an owner, because you're looking at not only the Finn McGuinness tape, but you're also looking at the matchup straight after the bye where he runs into Port Adelaide. What's a pretty restrictive matchup, even for if he's playing midfield, if he's moving to halfback, like it's being flagged a little bit during training this week. Brisbane are pretty restrictive to halfbacks as well. I'd be looking to jump off if you can. I think that it's you know, you've gotten a really good score over in round one. Chances are you probably put your VC or your captaincy on him in round one as well. So you've gotten a good score there. And yes, this score's probably hurt you this week, but best 18's helped to soften the blow. But next week, when he comes against Finn McGuinness, that's not best 18. That's best 22. That's scary. But I think there's a few options that you can jump onto because it is a sideways move. You'll make money basically to every other option you go to in that defensive line because I think if you're trading him, you probably are going into a defender. If you're looking to go like for like at that premium level, there's probably 3 that stand out the most compared to the rest. I'd say that that's Harry Sheasel. If you don't have him, I would just go straight there. I think that that's a very easy move to make. I think that Nazai Wanganeen-Miller has shown that he's playing very good footy, and I think that he's one you could look to go to. And probably the other one is Tom Stewart. I think he's one that you can consider going to as well. I mean, Massimo D'Amborsio is also someone that you could move to as well if you're wanting to skip a bit of money, restructure your team. But I think that those 4 are probably the most obvious options. Maybe you could throw a Jordan Clark in there as well, who's shown that he can be scoring quite well. I'm still a bit nervous how well that holds up. I know that Chapman's not far away now. I think he's about 1 to 2 weeks away. I don't think I'd be going to Salem anymore. I think that we've seen enough to know that that's just not there anymore.
Yeah. He got out of jail in the end of that quarter. Yeah.
And more. He got out of jail and more. But yeah, I think that that's where I'd be looking to go if I had Nick Daicos.
Rinse for non-owners. We were all planning to get him post-buy. MiniMonk's alluded to some stuff that's through there. Is this just a nice slice of luck? I'd use that term loosely, by the way. But things that have just turned your way for a non-owner that you just take that as a benefit and jog forward?
Well, okay, so as an owner for a start,
sure,
you have to answer one question. Do you still think he's the clear number 1 defender for the year? Okay. Now, I know it's going to impact your team dollars right now, okay, to hold him, but he won't be scoring 60s every week. You know,
that's the worst I've seen Daicos play. Yeah.
Let's be honest, MJ. Like, I know that this is hindsight after the fact. I was very nervous last game, going into last game as a non-owner. He came off 123 the week before. Like, it's not like he's in bad form. It's not like it was just a mare of a game, yeah? So
for him and the Pies,
do you really want to trade out of who you consider as the clear best number 1 defender for the year? And I get it with the dollars. But even if he goes, let's just say if he goes 110 and 90 the next 2 weeks, he's only dropping 45,000 over the next 2 weeks. It's not like it's ground-shattering money we're talking about. And he's got a little bit of, I've said it before, the shit on the liver type approach. He wants to get one back on Finn McGuinness. So even if Finn goes to him in round 4, that's going to be one hell of a matchup to watch the game with, So as nervy as it is now, and it's sort of shifted, we were all nervous as non-owners last week. Guess what? The owners are now nervous. They've got that happy finger. They want to trigger, they're going to pull that trade period. Well, I'm going to trade him. I'm going to trade him. Yeah, but do you really want to? Just think through that because it's called rage trade for a reason. I know that he's burnt you. He's annoyed you. He's really impacted. Have a clear mind, though, in regards to the decision. And don't go using hindsight in 3 weeks' time for what the decision you make this week. Because there's nothing better to go, bugger, I knew I should have traded him. Oh, bugger, I knew I shouldn't have traded him. Because guess what? You made that call right now.
Yeah, you've got back at it.
Same thing at the start of the year when you were choosing him and you were having that debate yourself at the start of the year. It's your worst fears has been come to fruition,
Absolutely.
But the fact of the matter is, last week's score's not going to, he's that type of guy, MJ. He's a stud, rightio? One bad score, he's popping this week. It doesn't matter who he's playing, especially a grand final replay that, he may or may not have done as well as what he would have wanted in the grand final. It's up to him to work that out. But the fact is, he's still angry about last week, yeah?
Oh,
He's likely to
no
come
mistake.
out.
It wouldn't shock me for him to go 130 for sure. I suppose, MiniMonk, the positive for Daicos owners is if they're going to choose to hold him through, and like you've said, there's a way of which you could choose not to, is it gives them the opportunity to look at a premium defender that's falling down quickly. And while others are chasing Daicos, you don't have to worry about it. I'm alluding to a James Sicily, who is very much within a break-even territory for him at 126, based on what he did for us last week. But there's a world where he's coming up against Geelong. They're going to make that certainly quite a challenging game for him. They will not give him the freedom and space that Geelong were allowed at least last week, or Sicily earned last week. There's a world where he drifts right down to 800,000 in a fortnight's time. I think it's probably more likely 820, 825-ish is probably where he sits. It's 2 weeks away, but there's no early buy for James Sicily. How much of a priority would trading into Sicily hit for you, knowing that Daicos is coming for non-owners in 3 to 4 weeks' time, let alone a bunch of other options that we're about to see roll through, like a Clayton Oliver, that are all going to be way down on starting price? How high on your trade forecast should James Sicily be?
I think he should be a monitor, but I don't think he's going to be right near the top. I think a lot of people have a lot of defenders already, especially ones that they're pretty happy with. They're not running that many rookies on field. And chances are they might be running someone who's likely to get DPP in their midfield as well. Like, I think Roberts will basically get it. McKercher will get it. Nick Martin will get it. Zach Fisher will get it from up forward as well. We're going to have an abundance of defenders. I don't think we're going to be targeting many at this stage. I'm not convinced 100% that Sicily will be a top 6 defender at this stage. I think last week showed that he can have a massive scoring ceiling, but I think we already knew that. I'm not sure that Sam Mitchell will want to play that way many more times in the year.
No.
MJ, what I want you to do right now is, can you cut and paste? Are you skillful enough to do cut and paste? Can you cut out James Sicily's name and have this discussion on the SC pod this week? Because that's the pod that we need to discuss in James Sicily.
All right, we'll bring up Sicily in the episode that's landing. Well, probably this time tomorrow, you'll be able to get that. All right, we'll bring him there. There is a player I want to bring up in the Supercoach episode as well, but I think we're here for him anyway. Rids, Hayden Young, awesome first 3 quarters of round 1, goes in to plug some holes, comes back into that midfield as MiniMonk forecast for us over on the social media platform of X. Of the ins of Fremantle indicated he was moving back into the midfield, but he's certainly, from a scoring perspective, he's not been bad. He's averaging 85. So if that's the worst thing in your team, but Rids, if this is the worst thing in your team, now you're probably in an amazing spot. How much of a trade out priority should Hayden Young be, or is it just cop it on the chin and look for something else to deal with?
Yeah, so the first thing you got to do, if it's the worst thing in your team, and I want to emphasize that, the worst player in your team, I would find it very hard to believe that he is the worst player in anyone's team this week. Okay,
100%.
The next thing is, if he is the worst player in your team, who are you going to anyway, MJ? Like, he's averaging 85 and he's got a break even of 105 and he's got the best buy you could possibly have in the middle of the season. Who are you going anyway? Do you really want to go Young to Mass? Because that just makes me want to vomit in my mouth a little bit, yeah?
It does. I think, speaking of, go for it, yeah.
I was just going to say quickly, I don't think that he's going to go 4 tackles again anytime soon. We look at last year when he ended the season, when he was in the midfield, he went 10, 8, 7, 7. He went 10 the previous week and he went 4 this week. Yeah, I think that a bit more of a contested game will really suit him against Adelaide. I think that the matchups for the next few weeks will try to help him. He has a bit more of a target to go to. Against North Melbourne, he didn't really have anyone to go and stand beside and sit next to. I think that this is just one where you just keep moving and just don't worry about it.
And can I just be really clear on this, MJ? I want to be really clear.
Yes.
Just forget about Young, okay? Have your fun with your rage trades in the first couple of weeks, but everyone bloody owns him. It's okay. We're all living through the same rage trades in the last day or two. Let's just move on, yeah?
Yeah, I agree with that. So Rids, this is a question for you, MiniMonk. Rids has already said Young down to a Massimo. Don't even touch it. In fact, don't touch anything that involves with Hayden Young. It's absolutely there. Mass is an interesting
I didn't say that. I actually said Young to Mass makes me vomit in my mouth. That's how hard that's it there.
Just don't misrepresent you. I appreciate that.
It's a chase.
What's your thoughts about him as an option? The break-even's really attainable. We've already done the conversation around Bonner and the potential parallels in terms of the warning signs. But for those that have a Buderick that they've been really underwhelmed by, those that are playing the injury roulette of Reed, of Gibcus, of Caulfield, I know there's $200,000 to $300,000 in difference, so it's not as simple and easy. Is this a priority move, or is this more of a dependent on the scenario of your backline priority?
I think it's an interesting move. I think this really depends on how you want to go into this week. I think Rids and I have tried to express the two different viewpoints. Either you're going for a couple of mid prices, or you're going one up, one down. You kind of get to a premium and a rookie alongside it. I think if you're going for one of those mid prices, I think Massimo is the one that makes the most amount of sense for us. The break even is the lowest, the price point's the best. Yes, we are a bit clogged in the in our defensive lines, but chances are we've got a way to DPP or get a bit fancy with the looping as well. And the matchups are really good for the next few weeks is the other thing that I really like about it. And this is why I was trying to highlight that when we're coming into these mid prices. You know, the next 3 weeks is Geelong, Collingwood, and Gold Coast, which, you know, doesn't scream great matchups, but they're pretty good for someone who's being able to get around the ground a lot and find a lot of space. And I think that's the biggest thing. Like, if you've watched him being played and you've looked at his heat maps, you'll notice that he's not just stuck on that half back line. He's not stuck on that D50 line. He's getting touches almost in inside 50 as well for his attacking 50. He's getting a pretty good license to roam. And so I talked about it before with Sicily that the Hawks might not want to play that same way that they played in quarter one, where Sicily got something like 60-odd fantasy points and Massimo had to think about 30-odd. The thing is, his score build wasn't based off of that kick mark chip game style. He only had, I think, the 4 marks in that game. Sorry, he had the 8 marks in that game. He had the 4 marks the week before. I think there's been enough there to show that he can find his way to the peel, and that to me considers that he's a good enough pick to bring in.
Fair enough. So
let's MJ, he's priced at 61. He's going to make you money, okay? So he's not a terrible pick.
No,
I think that's
it depends who you're going from to get him, though, yeah? If it's a Caulfield to Mass, I don't mind that move.
Buderick.
A Buderick makes sense, yeah? But, yeah, it's just more about who you're going from. Would I suggest that a Daicos to Mass is a great move? Probably not. Would I suggest
Young to vomit in the mouth?
Yeah. So if Young to Mass makes you vomit, what does Daicos to Massimo make you do?
Projectile vomit, I think.
Well, the thing about Mass that I think we all have missed the point on a little bit, but we sort of know it. It's sort of in the back of our minds. We got a lot of defenders gaining defensive status come round 7. So someone like Mass makes a lot of sense. Make $100,000 and then go a Martin back or a McKercher back, and that solves a lot of your issues. And then you can actually bring in your midfielder or forward. You know, so there
almost
is
at the time, almost at the right time for a Clayton Oliver type off his bye.
Correct, mate.
So
but everyone's got to go and work out their next few weeks of trades and what it looks like. That's the main point of this.
That's a really good shout. Tom Powell, Rids, while you're there, you and I have at various times of the pre-season and at various times over the past couple of years have been quite keen on Tom as a fantasy prospect. The role is there for him, undoubtedly. Outside of LDU, he's getting as many centre bounce opportunities as anybody else. He's got a very handy break even. The role is there. He pops a big ton last week with a couple of goals off the back of, I think it was a high 70s score the week before. What's your take on this? Is Mass the greater priority for you, or is Powell like, you know what, man, for like 100K or so, I can get off an Alex Sexton and keep that cash generation moving with a Tom Powell? What's your take on him?
Before I answer your question, let me tell you a story. So I'm going to tell everyone the story. In the preseason, and MJ loves players, okay? He gets hung up on players. You would have noticed Josh Kelly, these sort of guys. You know,
never heard of him.
That's why he's turning grey, or he's got a different kind of peroxide in his hair tonight. So the fact is, though, in the preseason, I got Tom Powell at a very discounted rate in a trade that MJ and I did in one of our keeper leagues that we're all in. And I actually think I got an absolute bargain. We're playing salary cap, though, okay? So I love Tom Powell. We're playing salary cap. Last week, you could not ask for a better role, okay? That's the first thing. He had CBAs up the yin-yang. I think he had CBAs for breakfast before he even went to the game, okay? He had that many. He got a lot of handball receives throughout the game. He's got a good split of stoppage to transition points. He's at the right age. He was a high draft pick. He was an elite junior. There is a world he pops. Unfortunately, he's also at a club with a lot of talent, okay? How many points do they have to share? But he's also in the right line.
Yes.
So it's going to be team specific, this one, okay? If you're looking at a Sexton to jump off and you don't want to go down to a Thomas next week or a Gallagher this week or whoever else, there's worse moves in the world than going a Sexton to Powell, put it that way.
Yeah, it's a fair shout too. There's a couple of, Rids has already mentioned his name there. You've got a Harvey Gallagher MiniMonk. Again, it's probably a Sexton type you're jumping off. He's gone back-to-back 56, got a negative break-even and a matchup against the Eagles this week. How much of a priority for him, knowing that you've got Thomas, who I think will be very, very popular next week, despite only having one score over 40 for the year, will be riding that money train for a long, long time. Is this team dependent, or is this a potentially important maneuver depending on what you need to do?
I think your trade-ins are always going to be team dependent. It's about what you can do and what else you can do. I mean, if you don't have an Ollie Dempsey, would you rather a Dempsey than a Gallagher? Tricky now that the prices are different. Would you rather wait the week, as you said, and get a Harvey Thomas? Is there a different rookie with a lower break-even? I mean, we look at the list of low break-evens for this week. Harvey Thomas on the buy, you're not getting him. Blake Howes, a lot of teams already have. Matt Roberts, teams have. Burgess, would you rather go Burgess than Gallagher? Probably not. McKercher, most teams have. And then it's Gallagher. If you're trying to chase a break-even this week, it's probably him. Are there other things you can do with your trades? Potentially. Absolutely. If you're looking to go one up, one down, here's an option.
Yep, it's fair enough. Rids, talk to me about Zane Dersma. Again, we talk about these cash generators, and maybe MiniMonk has half stolen the thunder for us there, but he popped a mid-80s score for us last week, double-digit marks, negative break-even. You mentioned this very talented North Melbourne side. Is this, again, one that for you is too hard to justify trading into, not just for the price, but also for the caliber of players around him? Or is there something here for us?
Okay, so I want to throw out a bit of caution with Zane Dersma. He's going to be a gun in a few years' time, but he had 11 marks in this game of 40 last week, and they play Brisbane and Carlton in the next two. I don't see him having 11 marks in either of those contests, maybe even struggle to have 11 marks combined in those two games. Yeah. Be very, very cautious. And at his price point of $350, he's the one that the cash
that cash
generation dries up quickly if he only pops an awful buy.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a fair shout too. I'd much rather a Gallagher over a Dursma. That's
Round
not saying
12
Gallagher's
is
the
an
number one pick.
buy. If you've already got your shot,
Yeah.
there's another
I
guy
just lost Rids for half a second.
too. There's Heaney. There's Jordan, round 12 buy. Did you get me then? Am I back?
Yeah, you dropped
so
out
you
on
think
us.
about the other ones, though, in that forward. Heaney, Jordan. You know, there's quite a few. So you just got to be cautious about that mid-season buy.
Yeah, no, it's a really good shout for us through there. We've talked a little bit about a ruckman and the potential timeline to move off. Tough matchup last week that we're starting to see a pattern emerge, and St Kilda had that tougher matchup for us. Break even of 144 for Rowan Marshall. Still a seven-figure player, but probably won't be this time next week. It's in his wheelhouse, but probably won't be. MiniMonk, is this one of these telegraph trades for you that you're highly looking at inside the next 2 to 3 weeks?
I think he is the one that you should be looking at if you have Grundy and you're looking to jump off at his buy, because the timing is right there. You say that he's probably coming down in price below 7 figures. I think you could almost bookmark it in. He's coming against Essendon this week. The dual ruck setup we saw last week restricted Grundy to a 90-odd. I think that could be a pretty similar one. The break-even might spike again if it's a 90-odd and stay at the 150 marker. Comes up against Richmond the week after, so that's round 4. The round before you're looking to trade, that might help to reset it. And then the 3 matchups immediately afterwards. GWS, very friendly for rucks. Western Bulldogs, very friendly for rucks. Port Adelaide, very friendly for rucks. He could be back above $1 million in those 3 weeks' time. I think that he is the easiest move. And I think if you are not looking at it, then you're missing a trick.
It's fair enough too, boys. That is us done and dusted for our fantasy roundtable strategy episode. But Rids, jump on for one last thing before we wrap it up.
So I just wanted to highlight with Marshall as well. If you didn't start Tristan Cherry, or if you started Gaundy and you were stubborn and you didn't go trade into Cherry, guess what everyone else is going to be doing in 3 or 4 weeks' time when Cherry's really starting to have 250,000 on his head from his starting point? We're looking at Rowan Marshall. Rowan Marshall has a round 15 buy. We move off that round 12 buy in the mid-season. We're actually using that money straight away.
Yes.
So don't let stubbornness stop your money generating, okay?
Yeah, it's a good call. We are about to learn a lot over these next 4 weeks, whether you're a Daicos starter and what that means, whether you've gone a 3 ruck approach, whether you've gone heavy on a couple of buy premiums, whether you'd be spinning the wheels a little bit on a treadmill or not. Like, while it's still a long way from seeing some fruit of work, we are about to get a little glimpse over the next couple of weeks.
MJ.
Yes.
We got to talk about Triple C here, because Monk versus Rids last week. Yeah, apparently.
I didn't want it.
And Monk got me by 20 points or whatever.
Well, that's because you had Brody Grundy on the bench, didn't you?
Yeah, that's all right. That's fine. But that's the difference. Yeah. Sometimes we focus on league matchups. Sometimes we're looking at overall. But at that point in time, it was nice that I had that on the bench. But who knows? It doesn't matter. I might have went and chose a Riley Bonner last week instead, you know? So it doesn't matter. It's about the win, and Monk got one over me. But I just wanted to highlight, I think it's clear that Monk and Rids are the 2 AF big boys now in the coaches panel. Because I could see you're going grey, mate, after your start to your AF season now. So I just wanted to highlight that and give you a bit of a clip.
I believe I have as many wins as you in that league, mate. So just
I lost by 1 point and 20 points. How unlucky, yeah?
Yes.
But anyway,
it's going to be very...
Ken Hinkley impression. 2-0, boys. 2-0. Let's go.
Yeah, that went so well from him, didn't it? Exactly right.
It's all down here.
It's all downhill. The moment you make any contrast to Ken Hinckley, it's all downhill. If you are curious, this week I play Zach, so we'll see how that goes. MiniMonk has got Dunkley's Donuts, so you've got yourself some Jake action over there. Rids is up against the Calvinator, so we'll see how from the traders. So we'll see if we continue on the 3-0 approach, or if it's the 0-3.
So it's the two big guns off the trios, yeah. So it's Rids against Calvin, the trios of the traders versus the CB boys, and it's the two big guns. Let's see how we go.
Well, we'll find out how it all goes. We'll keep you up to date. If you're enjoying these strategy roundtables, you can watch them on YouTube if you haven't subscribed to the channel. The good news is it's not too late. You can hit the subscribe button, turn the notifications on. So as soon as an episode goes live on YouTube, you can watch these if you would like. It's even got some of the graphics, so you can keep your way alongside. Or if you're like, nah, stuff watching that, I just want it in my ears. Great, you can go and check that out, whether it's Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube Music, wherever you choose to get your podcast, you can go and check that out. We are there as well. All the details for how you can become a part of our Patreon supporter group are in the details of the description of this episode. In fact, just over the past couple of days, there's been a ton of new premium level Patreons that have rolled through. I want to give them all a quick shout out before we wrap up. So a big thank you to I roll through them here. Joseph McDonald, thank you. You've jumped in at the premium tier. Darren Boseveld, I'm sorry if I've mispronounced your surname, Darren. Marcus Stent, JC, MC Socks and Thongs. Okay, mate, whatever floats your boat. Henry Williams has jumped in. Jimmy Johnson and Grant Searless have all jumped in just in the past week at that premium tier level. If you want to become a Patreon, whether it is because you just want to support the coaches panel, pick up some bonus content, an additional podcast, in fact, 2 our premium tier podcasters get. The details to join the Patreon are in the description of this episode. Hey, thanks for tuning in again. We'll be back in 24 hours with our strategy roundtable for Supercoach. But AFL Fantasy coaches, we wish you luck in another week of Best 18.